Kinderlach, I'm going to share with you an amazing story. The story takes us back more than 100 years ago, the beginning of the 1900s. We travel to a famous country where many of us come from, Russia. At that time, the king of Russia is a man named Nicholas II. He's the Tsar of Russia. In just a few years, he and his family would be killed. But in the beginning of the 1900s, he was the king, he was the Tsar, Nicholas II. The prime minister of Russia was a man named Stolypin. First, he was what's called the interior minister of Russia, meaning in charge on security of the country, and then he becomes the prime minister of Russia, one of the most powerful people in the country. Stolypin was a major anti-Semite. He hated the Jewish people with a passion, to the extent that many of the pogroms that occurred in Russia over those years, he was behind them. In fact, one year, 1905, he was planning in one summer to arrange 116 pogroms in cities in Russia, to kill Jews in different cities in Russia. Baruch Hashem, thank God it didn't materialize. But this was Stolypin. And here is the story. One day, the Rebbe Rashab, of course, Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber Schneerson, the fifth Rebbe of Chabad of Lubavitcher, finds out that Stolypin is about to issue forth a new gzeira, a new decree against the Jewish people. How does the Rebbe Rashab find this out? The Rebbe had his people that lived in Peterburg, in St. Petersburg, which was then the capital of Russia. And from his people, he found out that Stolypin is about to issue forth a new decree. And they already tried to do different things in order to get him not to do it, but nothing helped. What do?
What's a pogrom?
What's a pogrom? A pogrom was a very tragic and terrible thing when Goyim who lived in a particular town or city would start a riot, and they would loot Jewish homes, they would kill people, they would beat people, they would break glasses in stores, they would steal. This was a pogrom. And this guy Stolypin was known for arranging a lot of these pogroms in different cities of Russia. And there were many times that different great leaders of Russia went to meet him, and they were sometimes successful. We know the Rebbe Rashab writes about a few meetings. He writes about one meeting that he himself had with Stolypin. In fact, there's a very cute story, very nice story. Once, the Rebbe Rashab went to meet Stolypin together with two other people, Reb Chaim Brisker, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, who was one of the greatest Rabbonim and Go'inim of the time, Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, and he was very close to the Rebbe Rashab. He was in the city of Brisk in Lithuania, so he's known as Reb Chaim Brisker, together with another person whose name was Zev Tyumkin, Vladimir Tyumkin. And they went to meet Stolypin, and Stolypin was in a big rush, so he wanted to finish the meeting very fast. So he gave one hand to the Rebbe Rashab, and his other hand he gave to Tyumkin. And Reb Chaim Brisker was the third one. He didn't give him a hand, and he gave them both a hand, and he wished them goodbye. So on the way out, the Rebbe Rashab felt that Reb Chaim Brisker, who was a great, great man, might feel a little bad. So he tells him, it says in the Haggadah clearly, before we read about the 10 Makkos in the Haggadah, we say, Davar acher, biyad chazaka, shtayim. So the Rebbe Rashab says, when a Davar acher gives a yad chazaka, it's to shtayim. You know what a Davar acher is? A Davar acher is a chazer. So when a Davar acher, a chazer, gives his hand, his strong hand, it's to shtayim, it's to two people. So everybody had a good laugh and they went on. So when the Rebbe Rashab heard about this gzeira, that they cannot revoke, what do? So he called in his son, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe Rayatz, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, whose yahrzeit is on Yud Shvat, the 10th of Shvat, and he sent him, there was no choice, he sent him to go to Petersburg, to Peterburg, to the capital and see what he could do. So the Rebbe Rayatz, who wasn't a Rebbe yet, went to Petersburg. And he started to examine different ways how to deal with it. And they realized that with Stolypin, there's no way to do. There's nothing to do. So the Rebbe Rayatz figured out, he came up with an idea. There was an old man whose name was Konstantin Pobyedonostsov.
Why such a long name?
Why such a what?
A long name.
Why such a long name? A lot of the Russians had very long names. So this guy had his first name was Konstantin. His last name was Pobyedonostsov.
What does that mean?
What it means, I don't know. But I know that it's a very long name and a hard name to pronounce and remember. Now, this Pobyedonostsov was an old man, very, very learned, and he was Stolypin's Rebbe. Stolypin looked up to him because he taught him. This old man, Pobyedonostsov, was a tutor to Nicholas II, to the Tsar. He was his tutor when he was young. And he was even a tutor to the previous Tsar, Alexander. So he was a very influential person. He was very, very smart. He was very educated. He was a very strong Christian. And Stolypin, the interior minister and later the prime minister, looked up to him very much. Now, Pobyedonostsov did not like Jews either. He also despised Jews. He also hated Jews very, very deeply. But he had a very deep respect for religion. His father was a galach, his father was a priest, and he himself was very involved with the Orthodox Church in Russia. So he had a very big respect to religion, so therefore he had a lot of respect for rabbis, for rabbonim. So the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe Rayatz, managed to get an interview with this man. He was already out of the government. He was already out of being involved in the government, but he still had a lot of influence on Stolypin. He managed to get an interview with this man, with Pobyedonostsov. One problem. He gave him the interview Friday night, late at night. Now, how do we know the story? How do I know the story? The Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe Yatz, told this story to the Rebbe, to his son-in-law. And the Rebbe said this story publicly a few times. The Rebbe said it once, Chavdalet Teves Tavshin Yud Aleph, 1951, less than 1 year after the Rebbe Rayatz passed away. He said it Yud Shvat Tavshin Chaf at the Farbrengen, the end of Shvat 1960. He said it Yud Shvat Tavshin Mem Aleph, 1981. Each time he said different details of the story. The last time he said the story, he said that this guy, as given a wilde mensch, he was a wild guy and he had very wild ways he did things. He didn't have a normal structure, so he gives them this interview Friday night late. Problem number 2, he didn't live in Petersburg. He didn't live in Petersburg. He lived in a suburb a few miles away from Petersburg. Who's he? Pobyedonostsov, Stolypin's Rebbe. Pobyedonostsov didn't live in Petersburg. He lived a few miles away from Petersburg, together with many Russian aristocrats who had big homes with big gardens and a lot of dogs. They did not live in the city. They lived outside of the city where there's much more space, a few miles from Petersburg. And the interview is Friday night. What's the problem? The problem is there was no hotels around there, so he can't stay there. So how was he supposed to get there? Shabbos in Petersburg starts around 4 o'clock p.m. In the winter. The problem is that this old man, Pobyedonostsov, gave the Frierdiker Rebbe a strange time to come for a visit. When was it? Friday late at night. Now, Jews at that time were not allowed to live in Petersburg. But there were some Jews who had special permission to live there. Doctors, big businessmen, they could live there. So if Pobyedonostsov would have lived in Petersburg, The Rebbe Rayatz would have been able to find a place in Petersburg to stay in somebody's house or in the hotel and come to him Friday night. The problem was he didn't live in the city. He lived a few miles far from Petersburg in a suburb. In the suburb around Petersburg, where there's more space, many of the Russian aristocrats lived, wealthy people. There was a lot of space, so they had big homes, big mansions with large gardens and a lot of dogs. And there was no hotel around there. And there were no Jews who lived there. And certainly there were no Jews allowed to be there at all. And Petersburg, Shabbos begins in the winter around 4 o'clock p.m. Friday, 4 o'clock p.m. is Shabbos. And the cold there is unbelievable. You think we have cold here in the winter? It's nothing like the cold in Russia, in Petersburg, in Moscow. The cold there is tremendous. It's very, very cold. And Shabbos begins at 4 o'clock. And the interview is late at night. What is the Rebbe supposed to do? A hotel? There was no hotel there. To stay in Petersburg and walk all the way to his house would be a problem for a few reasons. Number one, the cold. Number two, it was dangerous. Number three, Tchum Shabbos. We have a problem of Tchum Shabbos. Once you leave the border of the city, you're not allowed to go more than 2,000 amas, which is around 3,000 feet. You're not allowed to walk. Around his house, he had nowhere to stay. There was no hotel. There was nobody's home. And this was the only time that he got, that Pobyedonoscev gave him a visit. So what is he supposed to do? So the Rebbe had no choice. He was thinking what to do. Remember, he has to be somewhere till he visits him, and then he can't stay in his home the whole Shabbos. After the interview, after the visit, he's going to leave his house. Where is he going to stay for the rest of Shabbos? He can't walk back to Petersburg. He can't stay in his house. Should he stay outside for 24 hours? It's very, very dangerous. And the cold, you can freeze, you can get very sick, you can die. So he can't stay outside. There's nowhere to stay. Nobody's going to let him stay in the house. Remember, this is a place where no Jew was allowed to come. Even in the city, you didn't have many Jews. But outside in these suburbs, oh, mamish, no Jews. So the Rebbe Hayatz, before Shabbos, went to a bar. So he found a bar close to his house. Now you have to understand what type of places these bars were. These bars, Russians would come. They would drink and drink and drink. They would get drunk. A lot of them were people of very low caliber, very low character, peasants or people who did not behave nicely. It was a place of drunkards. Certainly not a Jewish place, certainly not a place for a person like the Rebbe. It was a place where you get drunk. It was people that drank a lot. You had there thieves. You had there lots of types of people that were not of the best quality. Shikurim gazlonim. And that's where the Rebbe went. It was so cold. He described the story, it was so cold. So he took a futtermantel. We know the story because the Rebbe Rayatz told it to his son-in-law, the Rebbe. And the Rebbe said this story a few times. I know of 3 times he said the story. Once he said the story, Chavdalet Tevis Tavshin Yud Aleph, the 24th of Tevis, 1951. The second time, Yud Shvat Tavshin Chaf, the 10th of Shvat, 1960. And the third time, Yud Shvat Tavshin Amal of 1981. And each time he said different details. So the Rebbe took a futtermantel, the fur coat. Here. Come here. Okay, a futtermantel, a fur coat to stay warm. To stay warm. You see, he covered himself, and it was still so freezing, so he had to go into the bar. And in order to be there with all the wild people that were there, he had to drink or make believe he's drinking. But he couldn't actually drink because, first of all, there's Kiddush. You have to first make Kiddush, right? Once Shkia comes Friday sunset, you can't drink till you make Kiddush. You have to daven ma'ariv and make Kiddush. Second of all, some drinks, or probably many drinks, he couldn't drink there. Third of all, he didn't want to drink with them, but he had to make as though he's drinking, because if not, they would not let him be there. Besides all this, it was very dangerous for a Jew. These were people who did not like Jews. and he has to spend a lot of time with them, so it was very dangerous. But this is what he did. He stayed in the bar. Now, he gave the guy in the bar money before Shabbos to walk with him to the house, to the mansion of Pobyedonoscev. So the man walked with him till the mansion. It was still a far walk, and it was very cold, so he had his fur coat. But then he left him there and he went away. Now the Rebbe had to go through the courtyard, which was filled with dogs, till he got into the house. He knocks on the door. Pobyedonoscev opens the door and sees him and says, "Are you crazy? You walk through this courtyard? My dogs could have torn you to pieces and eaten you." So the Rebbe told him, "A Yid hat nit moide for a Hund. A Hund hat moide for a Yid." A Jew is not afraid of a dog. A dog is afraid of a Jew. He sits there for a few hours. He accomplished great things with him to be able to, he persuaded him to be able to convince Stalipin to change the situation. And now where does he go? He leaves the house in the middle of the night and he goes back to the bar and he stays there a whole Shabbos in the bar with all these goyim, drinking all these shikurim in his futtermantel. He's there. And he has to stay there a whole Shabbos. The way back, he walked alone, despite the danger. This story, the Rebbe Rayatz told his son-in-law, he told the Rebbe, Kinderlach, I want to ask you, what are the lessons we learn from this story? Every story about a tzaddik has a lesson to life. Every story in Torah teaches you something about your life. The Torah was given to be able to make our lives the happiest, most meaningful, enjoyable lives that can be. What are the lessons you learn from this story?
How much Mesiras Nefesh you need to have to help another Jew.
Beautiful. Beautiful. You heard how much Mesiras Nefesh you should have to help another Jew. The Rebbe Rayatz could have easily said, this is not something I can do. I mean, stay a whole Shabbos in a bar in such cold, put yourself in a very dangerous situation, walk alone late at night to Pobyedonoscev. I mean, it's a very, very dangerous task to do on many levels. And yet, what did he say? He heard there's a gzeir on the Jewish people, and he was ready to go on Mesiras Nefesh to save another Jew and many Jews. So the first lesson the Rebbe said we learn from this is every one of us has an opportunity, and we'll have opportunities throughout our life to help another Jew, to help another person, to help many Jews. And sometimes it demands of us to do something uncomfortable for us. Maybe to go to a place that's uncomfortable. Maybe to change a habit. Maybe to do something that's different for us, that's difficult for us. So you learn from here, he went and he spent, you know what it is for a tzaddik to spend Shabbos in such a place? Instead of being in shul, not davening with a minyan, not having kriyas HaTorah, not learning, not giving a shiur, not teaching, not being with other Jews. You know what it is to be there? Besides the danger. And yet, this is what he did, knowing that perhaps he can nullify the gzeir, nullify the decree. It teaches us what we have to do in order to help another person, to help another Jew. Even if it's difficult, even if it's challenging, even if it's sometimes against our nature. But there's another lesson. The other lesson is about being afraid in life. What did the Rebbe tell him? A Yid hat nicht moide for a Hund. The Rebbe knew that wherever you go, Hashem is with you. Hashem is with you in your heart always. Hashem is the creator of the world, and he loves you and he cares for you and he's with you and he holds your hand and he's in you every moment of your life. And therefore, when you're doing what he wants and you're connected to him, don't be afraid of anybody. Don't be afraid. Even in very difficult situations, you don't have to be afraid. And then there's lesson number 3 that the Rebbe once said at a Fabrengen, Yitzchak, Tovshin Memal of 1981, when I was a child, from this story. And that's, give me the fur coats. He said, but the Rebbe Rayatz didn't just go to the cold night of Petersburg. He made sure he's wearing a warm, thick fur coat. Because all of us are in the world. And the world is sometimes a very cold place. And in order to bring Kedusha into the world and to help another person and to help another Jew, you have to make sure you're dressed with a fur coat. What does that mean? It means you have to remain warm, always warm. In our life, what that means is a Yid has to have Varmkeit. You want to have warmth when you're connected to Torah, to mitzvahs, a warm davening, a warm Amen Yehi Shmei Rabbe, a warm kapitel Tehillim, a warm bracha, a warm mitzvah. You do a mitzvah with warmth. So then you're filled with warmth. So even though it's very cold around you, you don't get affected. You're healthy and you can affect other people. So now let's sing the niggin that the Rebbe Rayatz, the Frierdiker Rebbe, loved so much, known as the Beinani. Kedilach, I'm going to tell you another special story about the Rebbe Rayatz. My grandfather, my mother's father, Rabbi Lipsky, used to tell the story because he remembered when it happened. This happened in America. A family, a father and a mother, I think they lived in the city of St. Louis in the United States, came to New York, and they went to visit the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe Rayatz, who lived in 770 Eastern Parkway on the second floor. And they went to visit him to get a bracha from him, a blessing. They were not Hasidim in any way, but they came to get a bracha from a tzaddik, from a Rebbe, and they went into his room, his Yechidus room, on Yechidus for a private meeting with the Rebbe Rayatz. And they asked the Rebbe if he could bless their child. They had, I think he was 8 years old, 7 or 8 years old, a young boy. So the Rebbe said yes, they should bring him over to him. So they brought him over to his desk. And the Rebbe, this is what he did. He put his hand on the boy's head and he started to rub the head all around. He started to rub the head like this. He's rubbing and rubbing and rubbing. And the parents were not comfortable with it. Like, why is this rabbi putting his hand on the head and rubbing it all around? But out of respect to the Rebbe, they didn't say anything. But they weren't comfortable with it. And he gave a bracha and they left the room. My Zayda told us a few weeks later, they lived in an apartment building. And this boy was playing by the window.
Which boy was it?
This boy who was by the Rebbe with them was playing by the window. And he fell out the window. Many, many floors. I think it was around 8 stories. He fell down onto the sidewalk. Whoever saw it was certain that he will not survive. He fell down, and a few seconds later, everybody was stunned. The boy stood up and walked back into his house. And then they realized that just a few weeks before that, when the Rebbe Rayatz was rubbing him all over his head, what was he doing?
Making a cushion.
Very good, very good. He says he was making a cushion. He was creating some type of ruchnisdik cushion, a light.
What about the rest of his body?
The rest of his body was fine. The problem was his head. I mean, maybe he got some scratches or wounds, I don't know. But the danger was his head, and the head was cushioned, and he fell, and it was protected. And when I heard the story, I thought about it, that the most important thing in our life is we have to cushion our heads. We have to protect our heads. And I don't mean only physically protect our heads. How do we protect our heads? We protect our heads through Torah. When a Yid learns Torah, when a child learns Torah, the more Torah we have in our head and around our head is cushioned. Because sometimes in this world we can fall. The Yetzer Hara wants to make us fall. But when our head is cushioned with Torah, all around and around and around, then our heads are protected and we are protected. And that's why in life the greatest gift you can give yourself is Torah and more Torah and more Torah, to fill your head constantly with Torah. That creates the cushion that will protect you forever.